When I turned 18, I finally left Accra. It wasn't a dramatic escape. No shouting, no doors slamming behind me. I just quietly packed a small bag, hugged my few close friends, and left my old life behind. My parents barely noticed, and Darius probably didn't even realize I was gone for a few days. That was fine with me. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to breathe. I moved to another city and threw myself into my studies. Law fascinated me. The idea that rules could protect people, that justice could actually exist, felt powerful. I had learned firsthand how powerless someone could feel when the system, or your own family, ignored you. I promised myself I would never feel that powerless again. Managing my asthma was a constant struggle. I had to plan everything carefully, where I lived, how I traveled, even when I studied. I learned to listen to my body in ways most kids didn't have to. But it made me disciplined, became relentless. I spent hours in the library reading cases, memorizing laws, and practicing arguments. Nights turned into mornings. Mornings blurred into afternoons. Every day was about building a life where I could finally take control. Years passed. I graduated at the top of my class. I started working at a small legal firm that specialized in human rights. First, nobody knew me. I didn't have flashy connections or family backing. I was quiet, steady, and determined. I took cases that mattered, helping people whose voices had been silenced, defending those who had no one to stand up for them. Slowly, quietly, my career started to grow. People began to notice my work, not because I shouted about it, but because it spoke for itself. A few colleagues whispered about how sharp I was. Some clients started trusting me with their most difficult cases. And through it all, I kept my distance from the past that had hurt me so badly. I didn't need revenge. I needed purpose. Every time I won a case or helped someone find their voice, I felt stronger. Every breath I took without fear reminded me of that night years ago, the night Darius had almost killed me with his cruelty. I carried that memory like a fire in my chest, not to burn others, but to push myself forward. By the time I turned 25, I was no longer the weak girl from Accra. I was Kendi Afolabi, human rights lawyer. Strong, focused, and quietly unstoppable. And the world was only starting to see what I could do. News like this usually feels distant, something you read and scroll past. But when I saw it, my stomach dropped. The headline was everywhere. Darius Afolabi arrested. At first I thought it must be a mistake. My brother had always been arrogant and difficult, but arrested. For what? Then the details started coming out. Serious allegations of workplace harassment and assault. People were speaking up, telling stories about behavior that apparently had been going on for years. The more I read, the harder it hit me. This wasn't just some small argument or misunderstanding. These were real accusations, real victims, and a real legal case. It wasn't being handled quietly either. The case had reached the courts, moving all the way to the High Court in High Court of Accra. I sat there staring at my phone, barely breathing. For years I had tried to forget the past. My childhood, the night of my asthma attack, the way my family always protected him no matter what he did. I had built a new life, focused on law and justice, helping other people find their voices. And now the universe was forcing me to face it. My brother, my own blood, was standing in a courtroom, accused of things that sounded frighteningly believable. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel revenge. It was something more complicated. Sadness. A strange kind of disbelief. I kept scrolling, reading article after article. Some people defended him, saying the accusations were exaggerated. Others described patterns of behavior, anger, intimidation, things that didn't surprise me as much as they should have. Because deep down I had always known he could be cruel. I just never imagined the world would finally see it. The news kept repeating in my head. Darius Afolabi arrested. For the first time in years, I realized he was no longer untouchable. No longer the golden child my parents protected. Now he was facing the law, the same system I worked in every day. I closed my phone and sat in silence. Part of me felt nothing. Another part felt too much. This was real. It was happening. And whether I liked it or not, my past had just walked back into the present. When I walked into the courtroom, I didn't expect to see them. There they were, my family. My mother and father sitting in the front row, looking smaller than I remembered. Nervous, uncomfortable. My mother kept fidgeting with her hands, and my father stared straight ahead like he was trying to disappear. They hadn't seen me in years. Not really. And now we were all in the same room, in a place where truth mattered more than excuses. Then I saw Darius. He tried to act confident, sitting upright like nothing bothered him. The same old smirk almost appeared on his face, like he wanted to show the world he wasn't afraid. But the moment his eyes met mine, something changed. The smirk faded. Just for a second, I could see it, real discomfort. A flicker of recognition. He knew I was there. Not as the little sister he could tease or dismiss. Not as the girl who once begged for her inhaler while he laughed. I was different now. I wore professional clothes, carrying files and notes like any other lawyer. I had spent years studying law, learning how to argue, how to speak, how to fight for justice. I was no longer the quiet child who accepted being ignored. I was here for the case. And he knew it. My parents barely looked at me, but I could feel their tension. Maybe they were surprised to see me. Maybe they were hoping I wouldn't notice them. I didn't approach. I didn't say anything. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a courtroom. In High Court of Accra, emotions didn't decide the outcome. Facts did. Darius tried to regain his composure, straightening his shoulders, acting like he still had control. But the brief moment of discomfort had already told me something important. He wasn't untouchable anymore. And I wasn't the powerless girl he remembered. The courtroom was silent, but every word spoken felt heavy in the air. A witness stepped forward, someone who had worked closely with Darius for years. She spoke clearly, steadily, recounting moments of harassment, intimidation, and abuse at his workplace. She described how he would belittle employees, threaten them, and make even small mistakes feel catastrophic. Every detail was precise, every incident documented. As she spoke, I felt a strange knot tighten in my stomach. The words weren't just about work. The patterns, the arrogance, the cruelty, the need to control, suddenly hit me. Darius's behavior wasn't new. It wasn't just a moment of immaturity or a rare lapse in judgment. It had been his way for years. I remembered that night in Accra, 16 years ago. My inhaler in his hand, my lungs closing, his laughter cutting through my panic, my parents dismissing it like a joke. And now, here I was, watching evidence that what I had experienced was not isolated. He had done the same to countless others. The irony was sharp. I had spent years learning the law, helping people stand up against injustice, and here was my own brother being held accountable for the exact behavior that had shaped my childhood. Court documents, emails, and witness statements piled up in front of everyone. Each one painted a picture of intimidation, of someone used to getting his way, of someone who thrived on fear. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to react. I just sat there, silently observing, letting the pieces fall into place. I noticed how Darius shifted in his seat. His confident posture wavered slightly as the evidence mounted. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The same arrogance that had protected him for years couldn't shield him from this. The irony cut even deeper when I glanced at my parents. Their golden son, the one they always defended, was finally facing the consequences they had never enforced. All those years of excuses, of shrugging off complaints, of calling my struggles weakness, it all came back to this moment. I felt a quiet sense of clarity. No anger, no vengeance. Just recognition. The past had returned not to haunt me, but to prove what I had always known. Darius's cruelty wasn't a one-time thing. It was who he was. And now, the law, the system I had dedicated my life to, was holding him accountable. For the first time, the boy who had almost killed me with his laughter was powerless in the exact place where justice mattered most. The courtroom had emptied for a short break, but the tension in the air didn't leave with the other people. I stayed at my desk, reviewing notes, keeping my mind sharp, while around me whispers and shuffling feet filled the room. Then I felt a presence beside me. Darius. He leaned in close, just enough that I could hear him breathe. His voice was low, almost a whisper. You always hated me, he said, trying to sound casual, but there was an edge of something I had never heard in him before. Nervousness. I looked up at him calmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. My voice was quiet but steady, every word measured. "No," I said. "I didn't hate you. I just survived you." For a moment he froze. His confident mask, the arrogance he had worn for years like armor, faltered. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darted away for a fraction of a second before he tried to recover. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. I didn't give him the satisfaction of speaking again. I didn't need to. My calm, my presence, the quiet strength in my voice. It was enough. The years of training, of hard work, of taking control of my life had built something he had never anticipated. He had always underestimated me, always assumed I was fragile, weak, or dependent. But now he saw me, really saw me, for the first time. Not as his little sister, not as the weak child he could mock and control, but as an equal, strong, unyielding, untouchable in ways he never thought possible. I straightened my notes and turned slightly, giving him just a faint smile, polite but distant. I could feel his confidence cracking like thin ice underfoot. That old smugness, the careless arrogance that had allowed him to hold my inhaler and watch me struggle, was gone, replaced by hesitation, doubt, and something close to fear. He stepped back, still silent, still unsure, while I returned to my work. The irony wasn't lost on me. The boy who had once enjoyed my panic, who had thought he was untouchable in our family and in the world, was now the one who felt small. Nay, I was finally free from the shadows of his cruelty. I realized then that power wasn't about yelling or dominating. Power was quiet. It was control over yourself. It was showing up strong when everyone expected you to be weak. And in that moment, I could see it reflected in his eyes. He finally understood that I had survived him, and I had thrived. The courtroom felt heavier than it had all day. Everyone was waiting. No coughing, no whispers, no shuffling papers. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The judge looked down at the documents, at the evidence stacked in front of the court. Pages of testimony, messages, statements from witnesses. A clear pattern that couldn't be ignored. I watched Darius. He tried to look strong, sitting upright, jaw tight, like he still believed he could control the outcome. But something in his expression was different now. The confidence was fading. His eyes kept darting to the evidence, then to the judge, then to the floor. It was the first time I had ever seen him look uncertain. When the judge finally spoke, every word felt like it dropped into the room with weight. The verdict, the decision, the consequences. I won't repeat every legal detail, but it was clear. The evidence was strong. The court had made its judgment. Darius's face went pale. Not angry, not shouting, just stunned. For a moment, he looked smaller, like the boy he used to be, not the man he pretended to be. The same boy who had laughed while holding my inhaler. The same boy who had dismissed pain as weakness. The same boy who believed nothing could touch him. But now he was standing in the place where actions mattered more than excuses. In High Court of Accra, the atmosphere was heavy. I could see it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the way the courtroom remained silent even after the verdict was spoken. Justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it arrives like this, steady, unavoidable, and final. I glanced at Darius. He didn't meet my eyes. The arrogance was gone. A smirk, the careless confidence. All of it had vanished. He looked like someone who finally understood that actions have consequences. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I hated him. But because the world cannot ignore harm forever. I felt no celebration. No dramatic surge of emotion. Just a quiet understanding. This was the moment. The judgment day. The past had come into the courtroom, and the law had spoken. And for the first time, Darius realized he was no longer above it. After the case was finished, I stepped out of the courtroom and onto the courthouse steps. The air outside felt different, lighter but also strangely quiet. Reporters were still gathered nearby, cameras pointed toward the building, talking in fast voices about the verdict. Headlines would be written. Opinions would spread. People would argue. That was the nature of news. I didn't try to answer questions. I didn't look at the cameras. I just stood there for a moment, letting the cool breeze hit my face. It was strange how life worked. For years I had carried memories like heavy stones. The night of my asthma attack, the laughter, the feeling of being dismissed. I had built a new life, focused on law and justice, believing in the idea that people could change and systems could hold them accountable. And now, here we were. My brother had faced the consequences of his actions. The same system I trusted had spoken. It wasn't about revenge or hatred. It was about truth. I thought about circles. How life sometimes brings things back around in ways you never expect. The girl who once begged for air, ignored and laughed at, had grown into a woman who understood power and responsibility. I had learned to breathe on my own terms, to stand tall even when the world doubted me. And now, the boy who had once held my inhaler and laughed while I struggled to breathe, was the one sitting in court, facing judgment, gasping under the weight of his choices. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life has strange ways of completing circles. Not to hurt us, but to remind us that actions matter. I took a slow breath, steady and calm. The past had been painful, but it had also shaped me. I looked at the courthouse one last time and stepped forward. The story wasn't about hatred. It was about survival and moving forward. I was 16 the night I realized my own brother could watch me die and laugh about it. It started like any normal evening in our house in Accra. We had just finished dinner. My parents were still at the table talking, and my older brother Darius was leaning back in his chair, scrolling on his phone like he always did. I was sitting on the sofa nearby when I felt the first tight squeeze in my chest. First I tried to ignore it. Asthma attacks usually started slowly for me. A little pressure in my lungs, a short breath, then another. I reached for the inhaler I always kept on the table beside me, but before my fingers could grab it, another hand picked it up first. Darius. He held the inhaler between his fingers and looked at me with that lazy, cruel smile he sometimes had. I tried to breathe in, but the air felt stuck in my throat. Darius, give it back, I managed to whisper. Instead of handing it to me, he leaned back in his chair, raising the inhaler just out of my reach. Then he laughed. Gasp harder, loser. My chest tightened even more. Every breath felt smaller than the last. I stood up, dizzy, reaching toward him again. Please. Darius. I need it. He pulled his hand back like it was a joke, like we were just playing some stupid game. My parents barely looked up from the table. Stop being dramatic, Kendi, my mother said casually. But I wasn't being dramatic. My lungs were closing. My hands started shaking. The room felt like it was spinning as I tried again to reach for the inhaler. Please. Darius watched me struggle, still smiling, still holding the one thing that could help me breathe. That night, the air kept disappearing from my lungs. And for a moment, I truly thought I wasn't going to make it. Everything after that started to blur. I remember trying to breathe, but the air just wouldn't come. My chest felt like someone was sitting on it. My vision started getting dark around the edges, and the room sounded far away, like I was underwater. I was still reaching toward Darius. Please, give it back. But my voice was barely a whisper now. For a moment he still thought it was funny. He twirled the inhaler in his fingers like it was some kind of toy. I could hear him chuckling. Then my knees gave out. I dropped to the floor. That's when the room finally changed. My mother stood up suddenly. My father rushed over, shouting my name. I could hear panic in their voices now, but it felt distant, like it was happening in another world. Someone grabbed the inhaler and pushed it into my hand, but by then I could barely move. My lungs were struggling to pull in even the smallest amount of air. I remember hearing a door slam, voices outside, our neighbor shouting, "Call an ambulance. She can't breathe." The next thing I remember clearly was the sound of sirens. Red lights flashed across the walls of our living room as the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed inside with equipment and masks. One of them knelt beside me, placing an oxygen mask over my face. "Stay with me," he kept saying. "Breathe slowly." But breathing slowly was impossible. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Every breath felt like it might be my last. My chest burned, and my head was spinning so badly I thought I might pass out. When we reached the hospital in Accra, Doctors and nurses rushed me straight inside. Everything moved fast. Bright lights, machines beeping, people speaking quickly. Later, I heard the doctors talking to my parents outside my room. One of them sounded serious. She was very close to respiratory failure, the doctor said. The delay in using the inhaler made the attack much worse. She could have died. Those words stayed with me. She could have died. I spent the next 2 days in the ICU with tubes, monitors, and oxygen helping me breathe. Every small breath felt like a battle. But what hurt even more than the attack was what I heard my parents say to the nurses. My mother laughed softly and waved her hand. "Oh, it was just a sibling joke," she said. "Kids tease each other. Darius didn't mean anything by it." Joke. I lay there in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling while the machines beeped beside me. For everyone else it was just a joke, but in my mind that moment replayed over and over again. Darius holding my inhaler, smiling while I begged for air. And I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget that night. Growing up in our house, there was one rule everyone followed, even if nobody said it out loud. Darius could do no wrong. He was the favorite child, the golden son, the one my parents always protected no matter what he did. If Darius got into trouble at school, my parents said the teachers were overreacting. If he got into fights with other students, they said the other kids must have started it. If neighbors complained about his behavior, my parents would just laugh it off. "That's just how boys are," my father would say. But if I did the smallest thing wrong, it was a completely different story. I was the weak child. That's what they called me. Not always directly, but it was clear in the way they talked about me. Because of my asthma, they acted like I was fragile, dramatic, and always exaggerating. If I said I was sick, my mother would sigh. "You're always complaining, Kendi." If I asked for help, my father would shake his head. "You need to toughen up." Meanwhile, Darius could slam doors, shout at people, even insult teachers. And somehow it was always someone else's fault. At school, things weren't much better. Darius had a reputation for being arrogant. He liked pushing people around, especially kids who were smaller or quieter than him. Sometimes I heard stories about him bullying other students or making cruel jokes. But whenever the school called home, my parents immediately defended him. "My son would never do that," my mother would say. And if I ever tried to speak up about it, they would shut me down instantly. "You're his sister," my father would say. "Stop trying to make him look bad." After the night of my asthma attack, I tried once to explain how serious it had been. I told my parents that Darius held my inhaler while I couldn't breathe. I told them he laughed when I begged for it back. My mother just shook her head like I was being ridiculous. "Oh please, Kendi." He was joking. My father nodded in agreement. "You always take things too personally." That was the moment I realized something painful. In our family, Darius would always be believed, and I would always be the problem. So after a while I stopped trying to explain anything. I stopped telling them when he mocked me or when he pushed things too far. I kept my feelings to myself because I already knew what the answer would be. To them, Darius was the perfect son. And I was just the weak girl who complained too much.